The divorce papers felt heavier than they should have, considering they were just 23 pages of legal jargon that boiled down to one simple fact. Julia Reed no longer wanted to be married to me. I signed them anyway, sitting in my lawyer's sterile office while she waited in the hallway, probably texting her new boyfriend about how liberated she felt. Quote, my attorney, Bill Morrison, had known me for 15 years. He'd handled my corporate contracts back when I was still pretending to care about quarterly reports and board meetings. As sure as a man can be when his wife's been screwing her boss for 6 months. I handed him the papers, my signature looking surprisingly steady for someone whose life had just officially imploded. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Julia practically bounced into the office when Bill called her in. At 41, she still had that radiant thing going, the kind of glow that comes from expensive skincare and the thrill of getting away with something. Her interior design business had taken off in the past year, mostly thanks to connections through Grant Bishop's art gallery. Grant, who happened to be the reason we were sitting here dividing up 15 years of marriage like a garage sale inventory. Quote 2. Julia said, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she used with difficult clients. Quote, dry. Mature. Right. Like maturity had anything to do with her Instagram posts from last week. The ones where she was, quote, 4'4", at some trendy Sarasota beach bar, Grant's arm conspicuously draped around her waist. The comments from her girlfriends were priceless. You're glowing, babe, and living your best life. I almost laughed. Almost. Owen's always been reasonable, she continued, shooting me a smile that probably cost more in dental work than most people's cars. Quote 8. Grow apart. That's what we were calling it when your wife starts working late 3 nights a week and comes home smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. When she suddenly needs girls' weekends every other month and posts photos that somehow never include any girls. When she starts talking about finding herself and exploring new opportunities while eyeing your asset portfolio like a kid in a candy store. The house goes to Julia, Bill read from the settlement. Owen keeps the art collection and the downtown condo. Retirement accounts split 50-50, no alimony. Julia's smile flickered for just a second at the art collection part. She'd underestimated what 15 years of collecting was worth, especially the pieces I'd acquired through my gallery connections. But she recovered quickly, probably calculating that Grant's money would more than make up for it. Perfect, she said. I think this works out beautifully for everyone. Beautifully, like a Hallmark movie where the cheating wife gets to keep the house and the husband just smiles and wishes her well, except this wasn't a movie, and I wasn't nearly as noble as she thought I was. We walked out of the building together, a recently divorced couple making small talk about logistics, who would pick up what when the movers were coming, whether we should tell people together or separately. All very civilized, just like she wanted. I hope you know this isn't personal, Owen, Julia said as we reached our cars. We just wanted different things. Different things. She wanted Grant Bishop's money and social connections. I wanted a wife who didn't think marriage vows were more like guidelines than actual commitments. I know, I said, because it was easier than explaining that adultery actually felt pretty personal when you were on the receiving end. She drove away in her BMW, the one Grant had helped her pick out, according to Maya, Julia's sister, who'd been trying to warn me for months that something was off. Maya, who'd been watching Julia's transformation from devoted wife to social climbing opportunist with the kind of horror usually reserved for natural disasters. My phone buzzed as I sat in my car, watching Julia's taillights disappear into Sarasota traffic. A text from Dave Patterson, my oldest friend and the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. How'd it go? Need a beer? Dave was a cop, which meant he had a naturally suspicious nature and zero patience for cheating spouses. He'd been ready to investigate Grant Bishop for everything from tax evasion to jaywalking if I'd given him the word, but I'd asked him to stay out of it, at least until the divorce was final. Now it was final. I drove home, to the downtown condo that would be my new reality, thinking about Julia's parting words. This isn't personal, as if 15 years of marriage could be dissolved without personal feelings getting involved. As if her affair with Grant was just a business decision, like choosing between 2 interior design firms. Maybe she was right, though. Maybe this wasn't personal for her. Maybe I'd been just another acquisition in her carefully curated life, something to be upgraded when a better option came along. The thought should have hurt more than it did, but mostly I felt tired. Tired and oddly relieved. The condo was exactly as I'd left it that morning, boxes stacked in corners, my art collection leaning against walls, waiting to be hung. It looked like a storage unit, not a home. But it was mine, which was more than I could say about the house Julia was keeping. I was opening a beer when the doorbell rang. Maya Carter stood on my doorstep, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Julia's younger sister had always been the family rebel, the one who said what everyone else was thinking but too polite to voice. At 38, she had the same bone structure as Julia, but none of the calculated perfection. Where Julia was polished marble, Maya was rough granite, harder to shape but infinitely more durable. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside to let her in, noting the way she avoided eye contact. Maya had been avoiding me for weeks, ever since she'd tried to convince Julia to work things out instead of running straight to divorce court. Quote 20. I said. Maya's head snapped up. You know? 6 months, right? Started around the time she began working late on the Morrison Gallery project. Grant's been very hands-on with her career development. Then why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you fight for her? I handed Maya a beer and settled into my only remaining chair. What was I supposed to fight? She made her choice. I just decided to make mine easier. Your choice? To let her think she was getting away with something. Sometimes you let people play chess while you're playing poker. Maya stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. Quote 27, quote 28, quote 29. Brianna Walsh, Julia's best friend and enabler, who'd spent the last year encouraging Julia's journey of self-discovery while conveniently ignoring the adultery part. Brianna, who'd been married to the same man for 20 years and lived vicariously through Julia's rebellion. Perfect, I said. Let her celebrate. Let her post pictures and collect congratulations. Let her think she pulled off the crime of the century. But she did pull it off. She got everything she wanted. I smiled, and Maya took a step back. Maybe it wasn't a nice smile. Quote 34. Maya sat down across from me, her beer untouched. Quote 35. Quote 36. Quote 37. Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. It's about you. The words hung in the air between us like a confession neither of us was ready for. Maya had always been different from her sister, sharper, funnier, more real. Where Julia collected people like accessories, Maya actually cared about them. I'd noticed over the years. Noticed and carefully ignored because she was my wife's sister and some lines weren't meant to be crossed. Quote 39. Quote 40. Quote 41. Maya's laugh was bitter. She said you were comfortable but not exciting, safe but not passionate. She said living with you was like being married to beige paint, functional but uninspiring. Beige paint. That was what 15 years of marriage had earned me in Julia's estimation. I was beige paint. Quote 43, Maya said. Quote 44. Quote 45. The question slipped out before I could stop it, hanging in the air like a challenge. Maya's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. Quote 46, she said finally. Quote 47. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to close the distance between us and find out what it felt like to be with someone who saw me as more than beige paint. But wanting and doing were different things, and I'd learned the difference the hard way. Julia's not even moved out yet, I said. I know, I'm not asking for anything, Owen. I just needed you to know that someone was paying attention. Someone noticed that you're funny and kind and smart enough to let your cheating wife think she outsmarted you while you planned 10 moves ahead. You think I'm planning something? Maya studied my face like she was trying to read a foreign language. I think Julia has no idea who she just divorced, and I think Grant Bishop is about to find out that beige paint can be a lot more dangerous than he realized. She left after that, but not before kissing my cheek. A soft, brief touch that felt like a promise and a warning rolled into one. I watched her drive away, thinking about chess and poker and the difference between winning and victory. Julia thought she'd won. She had the house, the boyfriend, the sympathy of her friends. She had her freedom and her new beginning and her social media celebration of personal growth. What she didn't have was the full picture. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through her Instagram posts from the past week. Julia at the beach bar with Grant, both of them looking smugly satisfied. Julia at some gallery opening, radiant in a dress that cost more than most people's rent. Julia with her girlfriends, raising champagne flutes to, quote 52. The comments were everything I'd expected. Brianna gushing about Julia's, quote 53, Elise Martinez posting heart eye emojis and, quote 54. Other friends and acquaintances chiming in with support for Julia's brave decision to leave her stagnant marriage. Not one of them had asked about me. Not one had wondered if maybe there was another side to the story. I was just the discarded husband, the beige paint that Julia had finally found the courage to cover up with something more vibrant. Fine. Let them think that. I opened my laptop and started making lists. Assets, contacts, social connections, business relationships, all the threads that connected Julia's new life to her old one, and all the ways those threads could be pulled. Julia was right about one thing. I was reasonable, methodical. I thought things through instead of acting on impulse. She'd mistaken those qualities for weakness, but they weren't weaknesses at all. They were weapons, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Julia threw her, quote, 57, party at the Sarasota Bay Club. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Maya was, and she'd agreed to be my eyes and ears for the evening. Not that I needed much intelligence gathering. Julia had been posting about the party for days, sharing photos of decorations and catering preparations like she was planning a royal wedding instead of celebrating the end of our marriage. I spent that Saturday evening in my condo, hanging paintings and pretending I didn't care what was happening at the country club. The art looked good against the white walls, better than it had in the house, where Julia had always complained that my collection clashed with her design aesthetic. Too dark, she'd said. Too intense. Apparently, I had a type. My phone buzzed around 9:30. A text from Maya. Quote 58. The photo she sent showed Julia in a flowing white dress, because of course she'd worn white to her divorce party, standing next to Grant Bishop like they were posing for engagement photos. Grant looked exactly like what he was, a 50-year-old art dealer who'd never met a younger woman he couldn't charm or an older woman he couldn't fleece. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of practiced smile that probably worked on every divorcee in Sarasota. Julia looked happy, genuinely radiantly happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. It should have hurt to see her like that, glowing with the kind of joy she'd never shown with me. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. She had no idea what was coming. Another text from Maya. Quote 59. Julia's connections. Meaning my connections, the relationships I'd built over 15 years in Sarasota's art scene before I'd transitioned from corporate law to dealing. The collectors, the investors, the old money families who bought art the way other people bought groceries, regularly and without much thought about the cost. Grant thought he was inheriting my network along with my wife. He was about to learn the difference between borrowing someone's connections and earning them. I opened my laptop and started making calls. Richard, it's Owen Reed. I know it's late, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Richard Blackwood was old Sarasota money, the kind of collector who bought million-dollar paintings on a whim and forgot about them until his insurance company called for updates. He'd been one of my first clients when I'd started dealing, and over the years we'd developed the kind of relationship that went beyond business. Quote 61. Quote 62. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Richard Blackwood hadn't built a fortune by trusting people who made assumptions about his business. Is that so? Richard's voice had gone cold. Quote 64. Quote 65. Quote 66. Quote 67. Quote 68. Richard's full attention was something Grant Bishop definitely didn't want. Richard had a way of asking questions that made people uncomfortable, especially people who were trying to sell him something he didn't need. I made 6 more calls that night, reaching out to collectors, investors, and gallery owners who'd worked with me over the years. I didn't badmouth Grant directly. I didn't need to. I just made sure they knew he was making assumptions about relationships that belonged to me, not Julia. By Sunday morning, word was spreading through Sarasota's art community that Grant Bishop was overplaying his hand. By Monday, 3 of his biggest potential clients had called to cancel meetings. Maya stopped by Tuesday evening with takeout Chinese food and updates from Julia's social circle. He'd, quote, 69. Maya reported, settling onto my couch with her lo mein. Ese, quote, 70. Quote, 71. I repeated. They, quote, 72. Ik tavo nitsem, quote, 73. Quote, 74. Maya gave me a look that said she wasn't buying my innocent act, but she didn't push it. Instead, she told me about Julia's plans to redecorate the house. Our house, the one she'd kept in the divorce. Quote, 75. Maya said. Quote, 76. Quote, 77 and quote, 78. Grant was paying to redecorate the house where my ex-wife lived. The house where they'd probably been conducting their affair for months before Julia worked up the courage to ask for a divorce. The house that still had my name on the mortgage, even though Julia had gotten it in the settlement. I made a mental note to call my lawyer about that mortgage situation. There might be some interesting clauses in the divorce agreement that Julia and her attorney had overlooked. "Owen," Maya said, setting down her chopsticks, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Are you okay? Really okay? Because you seem different, calmer than I expected." I considered the question. Was I okay? My wife had cheated on me, divorced me, and was now flaunting her new relationship all over social media while her boyfriend tried to steal my business connections. By most measures, I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt focused, purposeful, like I'd been sleepwalking for months and finally woken up. Quote, 83. I told Maya. Quote, 84. Quote, 85. Quote, 86. Maya studied my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Quote, 87. Quote, 88. Quote, 89. Quote, 90. Quote, 91. I thought about that after Maya left. Did Julia know me well enough to be worried? Had 15 years of marriage taught her something about my character that even I was just discovering? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through her recent posts, more photos from the divorce party, more celebrations of her new life with Grant. But Maya was right. There was something different in Julia's expression in the newer photos. A tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was worried. The next morning, I drove past our old house, Julia's house now, on my way to meet a client. The sold sign was gone from the front yard, replaced by a dumpster and 2 contractor trucks. Through the windows, I could see workers tearing out the kitchen cabinets I'd helped install 5 years ago. Julia was erasing me, just like Maya had said, removing every trace of our marriage like it had been a mistake she was correcting. Fine, let her redecorate. Let her start fresh with Grant's money and Grant's taste and Grant's vision for their future together. I had my own plans for their future. My phone rang as I pulled into the parking lot of the Morrison gallery, the same gallery where Julia had first met Grant, back when she was just the interior designer and he was just her client, before they'd become whatever they were now. Quote, 93. Quote, 94. Jennifer Walsh, Brianna's daughter, the one who'd gone into journalism instead of following her mother into the country club circuit. I'd met her a few times at family gatherings, back when Julia and I were still pretending our marriage was solid. What kind of story? It's about gallery ownership and the relationships between dealers and collectors. There's been some talk about changes in the market, new players making big promises. I thought you might have some insights. New players making big promises. That could only mean Grant Bishop. I'd be happy to help, I said. When did you want to meet? How about tomorrow afternoon? I can come to your gallery. I don't have a gallery anymore. I'm working independently now, but we could meet at my condo. Perfect. And Mr. Reed? I should mention, this story is going to focus on accountability in the art world, making sure collectors know who they're really dealing with. Accountability. I liked the sound of that. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching people come and go from the Morrison gallery. Normal people, living normal lives, buying art because they liked it, or because it matched their furniture, or because someone had convinced them it was a good investment. None of them knew that their quiet Tuesday morning was about to become part of a much larger story. None of them realized they were witnesses to the beginning of Grant Bishop's very public downfall. I smiled and got out of the car. I had a client to meet, a journalist to prepare for, and an ex-wife's boyfriend to destroy. Just another day in paradise. The Morrison Gallery was buzzing with activity when I walked in Wednesday afternoon. Jennifer Walsh had suggested we meet there instead of my condo. She wanted to see the space where Grant Bishop conducted business, get a feel for his operation before she interviewed him. I hadn't told her that Grant had no idea he was about to be interviewed. Quote 102. Jennifer approached me with the kind of enthusiasm that made veteran art dealers nervous. She was 28, blonde like her mother, but with sharper edges and a digital recorder that she handled like a weapon. Quote 103. Quote 104. I said, which was both true and completely misleading. We found a quiet corner near the contemporary section, surrounded by paintings that probably cost more than most people's cars. Jennifer set up her recorder and pulled out a notebook covered in what looked like investigative shorthand. So, tell me about Grant Bishop, she said without preamble. What would you like to know? Everything. His background, his business practices, his relationships with collectors. I've been hearing interesting things. I glanced around the gallery, noting the way other visitors were pretending not to eavesdrop on our conversation. Sarasota's art community was small enough that gossip traveled fast, and Grant Bishop had made himself the center of several recent conversations. Quote 108, I said carefully. Quote 109. Quote 110. Quote 111. Jennifer's pen moved across her notebook. I heard he recently formed a business relationship with your ex-wife. Julia's an interior designer. It makes sense that she'd work with local galleries. But their relationship goes beyond business, doesn't it? I met Jennifer's eyes. She had the same predatory intelligence as her mother, but focused on truth instead of gossip. It was a dangerous combination. Quote 115, quote 116, quote 117, quote 118. I nodded slowly. Quote 119, quote 120. Concerned was a polite way of saying furious. I'd been getting calls all week from collectors who wanted to know why Grant Bishop thought he could speak for them, make promises about their buying intentions, or use their names to attract new artists to his gallery. Have you spoken to Grant about this? Not yet. I wanted to get background first, understand the full picture before I approach him for comment. The full picture. Jennifer had no idea how full that picture was about to become. Mr. Reed, she said, leaning forward slightly. Off the record, do you think Mr. Bishop is operating ethically? I considered the question. Grant Bishop was sleeping with my ex-wife, trying to steal my business connections, and apparently using client information in ways that made those clients uncomfortable. But ethics in the art world were often more flexible than in other industries. I think Grant Bishop is ambitious, I said finally. Sometimes ambition leads people to make assumptions about relationships that don't actually exist. Relationships with collectors? Among other things. Jennifer made another note. What about his relationship with your ex-wife? Do you think that's affecting his business judgment? Now we were getting to the interesting part. Julia's a smart woman, I said. She has good instincts about people and excellent taste in art. If Grant's smart, he'll listen to her advice. And if he's not smart, then he'll assume that marrying her gives him automatic access to relationships she doesn't actually control. Jennifer's eyebrows went up. Quote 134. I blinked as if I'd said something I didn't mean to. Quote 135. Quote 136. Quote 137. But I could see the wheels turning in Jennifer's head. A gallery owner making questionable business claims while fast-tracking a relationship with a recently divorced woman who had connections to his target market. That was the kind of story that wrote itself. One more question, Jennifer said. If you were advising collectors about working with Mr. Bishop, what would you tell them? I'd tell them to ask questions, verify claims, make sure they understand exactly what they're getting into before they commit to anything. Good advice for business relationships in general. And personal ones. Jennifer smiled. Thank you for your time, Mr. Reed. This has been very helpful. She packed up her recorder and notebook, then paused. Oh, one more thing. Would you be available for a follow-up interview after I speak with Mr. Bishop? I have a feeling this story is going to be more complex than I initially thought. I'm always available to help with accurate reporting. After Jennifer left, I wandered through the gallery, looking at paintings and sculptures that Grant probably thought he owned, but were actually on consignment from artists who could pull their work at any time. The art world was built on relationships and reputation, two things that could evaporate overnight if people lost confidence in your integrity. Grant Bishop was about to learn that lesson the hard way. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Julia's freaking out about something, won't say what. Can we talk tonight? I texted back, come over around 7, I'll cook. Cooking for Maya had become a regular thing over the past few weeks. She'd stop by with updates about Julia's state of mind, and I'd make dinner while we talked about everything except the obvious attraction building between us. It was a delicate balance. We were both adults, both single, but the timing was complicated enough to require careful navigation. Maya arrived at 7:15 with a bottle of wine and a worried expression. Quote, 148. She said, settling onto my couch while I finished the pasta. Quote, 149. Quote, 150. 151. Quote, 152. Quote, 153. I brought Maya a plate of linguine with clam sauce and sat down beside her. Quote, 154. Quote, 155. Quote, 156. Maya gave me a look that said she wasn't buying my innocent act any more than Julia was. What did you do? I had lunch with a journalist who's writing a story about the local art scene. We discussed business practices and professional relationships. Very educational conversation. Owen. What? You're going to destroy him, aren't you? I twirled linguine around my fork and considered the question. Was I going to destroy Grant Bishop? That seemed like such a harsh way to put it. I was simply making sure people had accurate information about his business practices and professional claims. If that information happened to destroy him, well, that was really more his fault than mine. I'm going to make sure people know who they're dealing with, I said. What they do with that information is up to them. Maya was quiet for a long moment, picking at her pasta. Julia's scared, she said finally. Of what? Of you. Of what you might do. She keeps saying you're too quiet, too calm. She expected you to fight for the house or make a scene about Grant, or at least act like a man whose wife left him for another man. How am I supposed to act? Angry, hurt, desperate to win her back. Maya looked at me directly. Are you? Desperate to win her back? No. Are you angry? Yes. At Julia. At both of them. But anger's not very useful unless you channel it into something productive. And what are you channeling it into? I smiled, and Maya shook her head. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying having a purpose again. For the last year of our marriage, I felt like I was sleepwalking, going through the motions, pretending everything was fine while Julia pulled away from me inch by inch. Now I'm awake. And what are you going to do with that awakeness? Whatever it takes. Maya reached for her wine glass, then changed her mind and reached for my hand instead. Her fingers were warm and slightly trembling. Owen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Is there room in your revenge plan for something good? Something that's not about hurting Julia or Grant? I looked down at our joined hands. Maya's skin was paler than Julia's, her fingers longer and more graceful. Artist's hands, even though she worked in marketing for a nonprofit. Quote 184. The word hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Us, Maya and me, the grieving ex-husband and his ex-wife's sister, finding comfort in each other while the world burned down around them. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like a betrayal or a rebound or a complication that would make everything messier. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing that had happened to me in months. Maya, I know it's complicated. I know the timing is terrible. I know Julia would lose her mind if she found out. But Owen, I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just family loyalty or sympathy for what she put you through. I lifted her hand to my lips and kissed her knuckles, buying time while I figured out what to say. Maya was right. The timing was terrible. Getting involved with her now would add a personal element to my conflict with Julia that could complicate everything I was trying to accomplish. On the other hand, Julia had forfeited any claim to moral high ground when she'd started sleeping with Grant Bishop. Quote 187. Quote 188. I pulled Maya closer, close enough to smell her perfume, something light and floral that was nothing like Julia's heavy, expensive scents. There's room, I said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not done with Julia and Grant. This thing with the journalists, the collectors, the business complications, that's just the beginning. I know. And it's going to get messy. Probably very messy. If you're with me, you're going to be part of that mess. Maya smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a genuinely happy expression. Owen Reed, she said, I've been part of Julia's mess my entire life. Being part of yours can't possibly be worse. I kissed her then, finally crossing the bridge we'd been circling for weeks. She tasted like wine and possibility, like everything Julia wasn't and everything I'd been missing without realizing it. When we broke apart, Maya was breathing hard, and her cheeks were flushed. Quote 195. She asked. Quote 196. Quote 197. Quote 198. Maya smiled and settled against my shoulder. Quote 990. Quote 200. Jennifer Walsh's story ran on the front page of the Herald Tribune's Sunday business section under the headline, it had, quote, 201. It was a masterpiece of careful journalism. No direct accusations, just a series of quotes from unnamed sources expressing concern about Grant Bishop's business practices and professional claims. The article detailed Grant's assertions about his client relationships, his promises to artists about access to high-end collectors, and his expansion plans for the Morrison Gallery. It also mentioned his recent personal relationship with, quote, 200. Julia wasn't named directly, but anyone in Sarasota's art community would know exactly who the article was discussing. I read the story 3 times over coffee, admiring Jennifer's ability to destroy someone's reputation without technically saying anything libelous. Grant Bishop came across as either delusional or dishonest, possibly both. The collectors quoted in the article made it clear that his claims about representing their interests were not just inaccurate, but unwelcome. My phone started ringing at 8:30. Quote 203. Richard Blackwood sounded amused rather than angry, which was a good sign. Quote 204, the quote 205, quote 206, quote 207. I nearly choked on my coffee. Sign quote 208, quote 209, quote 210, quote 211, the quote 212, quote 213, quote 214. Richard's laugh was sharp. I told him that a man who sleeps with another man's wife and then tries to steal his business relationships shouldn't be surprised when the well turns out to be poisoned. After Richard hung up, I called Maya. Have you talked to Julia today? She's been calling me every hour since 7 a.m., Maya said. She's convinced you orchestrated the whole thing. Did you tell her she was wrong? I told her she was paranoid. There's a difference. How's Grant handling it? According to Julia, he's furious. He thinks the journalist had some kind of agenda, that someone fed her information designed to make him look bad. Someone did. Owen, Maya, Grant Bishop tried to steal my client relationships and use my ex-wife as leverage to access collectors who trusted me. He made this personal the minute he decided that screwing Julia gave him the right to screw me professionally. I know, I'm not criticizing. I'm just impressed and a little scared. Scared of what? Of how good you are at this. Julia always said you were too nice to be a really successful lawyer. Turns out you're not too nice at all. I thought about that after we hung up. Was I nice? I'd always thought of myself as reasonable, fair-minded, willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But maybe those qualities had been luxuries I could afford when my life was stable and predictable. Now my life was neither stable nor predictable, and I was discovering that I had a talent for strategic thinking that I'd never needed to use before. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Grant. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I don't think we do. You know what you did. This isn't over. You're right. It's not. I turned off my phone and went for a walk on the beach. Sarasota in late fall was perfect. Warm but not hot. Busy but not crowded. The kind of weather that made people think about new beginnings and fresh starts. Julia was probably having second thoughts about her fresh start right about now. I spent the afternoon at a small gallery in downtown, looking at work by local artists who might be interested in switching representation if Grant Bishop's reputation continued to deteriorate. The gallery owner, Sarah Chen, was a friend from my corporate law days who'd always been straight with me about the business side of art. I heard about the Herald Tribune story, she said as we looked at a series of abstract paintings that reminded me of storm clouds. Grant's been calling around, trying to do damage control. Any luck? What do you think? The man basically admitted to using pillow talk as market research. Even if people believed his denials, who wants to work with someone that unprofessional? What are you hearing from the artists? 3 of them have already asked about pulling their work from his gallery. The others are waiting to see how this plays out, but they're nervous. Nervous about what? About being associated with a dealer who might not be around much longer. Gallery representation is about trust, Owen. Once that's gone, everything else falls apart pretty quickly. Sarah was right. The art world was built on relationships and reputation, and Grant had managed to damage both in the span of a single newspaper article. Artists would start pulling their work, collectors would stop taking his calls, and investors would look for more stable opportunities. Sarah, I said, studying a painting that looked like a sunset exploding into darkness. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to open a new gallery in Sarasota, what would be the biggest challenges? Startup capital, obviously. Finding the right space. Building relationships with artists and collectors. She looked at me sharply. Why? Are you thinking about getting back into the business? Maybe, hypothetically. Well, hypothetically, this would be a very interesting time to enter the market, especially if you already had relationships with collectors and a reputation for honest dealing. Hypothetically. Hypothetically. Sarah grinned. Owen, if you decide to stop speaking hypothetically, call me. I know at least 6 artists who'd be interested in talking to you. I bought the storm cloud painting and drove home, thinking about possibilities and timing and the difference between revenge and justice. Grant Bishop had tried to steal my professional relationships and use my personal life as leverage in his business dealings. The newspaper article had exposed his unethical practices and damaged his reputation, but it hadn't actually solved the underlying problem. He was still sleeping with my ex-wife. He was still operating a gallery in my city. He was still profiting from the art world that I'd been part of long before Julia decided to upgrade her life. Maybe it was time to do something about that. Maya was waiting for me when I got home, sitting on my couch with a bottle of wine and a worried expression. Julia came to see me today, she said without preamble, and she wanted to know if you and I were involved. I set down the painting and joined Maya on the couch. What did you tell her? I told her it was none of her business, that she'd forfeited the right to have opinions about your personal life when she started sleeping with Grant. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She said I was betraying the family, that you were using me to get back at her, that I was too naive to see what you were really doing. And what am I really doing? Maya looked at me directly. I don't know, Owen. What are you really doing? It was a fair question. What was I doing? I was systematically destroying Grant Bishop's reputation and business relationships while starting a romantic relationship with my ex-wife's sister. I was planning to re-enter the art business at exactly the moment when my main competition was imploding. I was using every advantage I had to ensure that the people who'd betrayed me suffered consequences for their actions. Quote 259. I said finally. Quote 260. I pulled Maya closer, breathing in her familiar scent. Quote 261. Quote 262. Quote 263. Maya was quiet for a moment, then, quote 264. Quote 265. Quote 266. I thought about my ex-wife, probably sitting in our old house with Grant, trying to figure out how their perfect plan had gone so wrong. Julia, who'd thought she could trade me in for a better model without any complications or consequences. Julia made her choice, I said. Now she gets to live with it. Maya nodded and settled against my shoulder. So what happens next? I looked at the storm cloud painting leaning against my wall, all dark beauty and violent energy. Next, we see how much damage one newspaper article can really do. The damage turned out to be considerable. By Wednesday, Grant Bishop had lost 3 major artists and 2 significant collectors. The Morrison Gallery's upcoming exhibition was postponed indefinitely when the featured artist decided to pull her work rather than be associated with the controversy. Grant's investors were asking pointed questions about his business practices and demanding documentation for his claims about client relationships. Maya kept me updated on Julia's increasingly frantic state of mind. Quote 271. Maya reported over dinner Thursday night. Quote 2172. Quote 273. Quote 2174. I twirled pasta around my fork and considered this information. Grant Bishop was discovering that stealing someone's business relationships was harder than stealing their wife. Collectors were loyal to dealers they trusted, not to dealers who claimed to represent them without permission. How's Julia handling the stress? Not well. She's been drinking more, sleeping less. She keeps asking me if I think you planned this whole thing. What do you tell her? That she's giving you too much credit, that sometimes bad things just happen to people who make bad choices. Maya was getting better at creative truth-telling. It was one of her more attractive qualities. Owen, she said, setting down her fork. I need to ask you something. Shoot. What's your endgame here? Grant's reputation is already destroyed. His business is failing. Julia is miserable and talking about leaving town. When does it end? I considered the question. When did it end? When Grant Bishop lost everything he'd tried to steal from me? When Julia realized that trading her marriage for a relationship with a failing businessman had been a catastrophic mistake? When everyone in Sarasota's art community understood that there were consequences for betraying people's trust? Quote 283. I said finally. Quote 284. Quote 285. I looked at Maya directly. Quote 286. Maya reached across the table and took my hand. Quote 287, plots quote 288, nate quote 289, patakin quote 290, and quote 291. I thought about Grant Bishop, probably sitting in his failing gallery, trying to figure out how to salvage his reputation and his business. I thought about Julia, discovering that her upgrade had turned into a catastrophic downgrade. I thought about all the people who'd assumed I would just quietly accept their betrayal and move on with my life. I'd call it education, I said. Teaching people that actions have consequences. Maya smiled. You're a very dedicated teacher. I've always believed in thorough instruction. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. Follow-up story running Sunday. Thought you'd want to know? I showed Maya the message. Looks like the education is continuing. What do you think the follow-up story will cover? Probably the aftermath of the first story. Gallery closures, artist defections, collector reactions, the human cost of unethical business practices. The human cost? Maya repeated, including Julia and Grant. Especially Julia and Grant. Maya was quiet for a moment, then, Do you ever feel guilty about this? About what? About destroying their lives. I considered the question seriously. Did I feel guilty? Grant Bishop had tried to steal my business relationships and use my ex-wife as leverage in his professional dealings. Julia had cheated on me for 6 months, then divorced me to be with her lover, expecting me to quietly disappear from their lives. They'd made their choices. I was just making sure those choices had appropriate consequences. Quote, 306. I said, quote, 307, quote, 308, quote, 309, quote, 310. It was a good question. What did I want to be when this was over? The vengeful ex-husband who'd systematically ruined the people who'd betrayed him, or something else entirely? Quote 311. Maya laughed. Quote, after Maya left, I sat on my couch looking at the storm cloud painting I'd bought from Sarah Chen. All that dark energy and violent beauty captured in oil and canvas. It was the kind of art that made people uncomfortable, the kind that revealed truths they'd rather not acknowledge. I pulled out my laptop and started researching commercial real estate in downtown Sarasota. Gallery spaces, specifically. There were 3 properties available, all in prime locations, all currently beyond my budget, but potentially affordable if I could find the right investors. Investors like Richard Blackwood, who'd been asking pointed questions about my future plans. Like Sarah Chen, who'd mentioned knowing artists who might be interested in new representation. Like the collectors who'd been calling all week to express their displeasure with Grant Bishop's presumptions about their business relationships. I made a list of potential contacts, then started drafting a business plan. Nothing elaborate, just an outline of what a new gallery might look like, the kind of artists I'd want to represent, the type of collectors I'd want to serve, the business practices that would distinguish my operation from Grant Bishop's failing enterprise. By midnight, I had the skeleton of a plan that looked both ambitious and achievable. A gallery that would serve Sarasota's art community the way it deserved to be served, with honesty, professionalism, and respect for the relationships that made the business possible. It would take time to put together the financing and find the right space. It would require careful planning and strategic thinking. It would mean competing directly with whatever was left of Grant Bishop's operation. It would be the perfect final move in a game that Grant didn't even realize he'd lost. I saved the business plan and closed my laptop, thinking about Maya's question. Who did I want to be when this was over? I wanted to be the man who'd turned betrayal into opportunity, the man who'd built something lasting from the wreckage of his marriage, the man who'd proven that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. Julia had called me beige paint, functional but uninspiring. She was about to learn that even beige paint could cover up a multitude of sins, and sometimes it could cover them permanently. Jennifer Walsh's follow-up story ran on Sunday with the headline, Sheksel, quote, 313. It was even more devastating than the first article, detailing the collapse of Grant Bishop's business relationships and the financial crisis facing the Morrison Gallery. The story included quotes from artists who'd pulled their work, collectors who'd canceled agreements, and investors who were demanding immediate repayment of loans. It painted a picture of a business built on false promises and inflated claims, now crumbling under the weight of its own dishonesty. Julia was mentioned by name this time, identified as Grant's Hoke, quote, 342, and the Webmont, quote, 315. The article made it clear that those collector relationships had never been transferable, and that Grant's assumptions about inheriting them had been both professionally naive and ethically questionable. I read the story twice, then called Richard Blackwood. Devastating piece of journalism, Richard said without preamble. That young woman certainly knows how to research a story. She's thorough. Indeed, Owen, I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about accountability in the art world and the importance of working with ethical dealers. What about it? I think Sarasota could use a new gallery, something that operates with the kind of professionalism and integrity that seems to be lacking in the current market. I smiled. That's an interesting observation. I'm prepared to make it more than an observation. If the right person were interested in opening such a gallery, I might be interested in providing some of the startup capital. What would constitute the right person? Someone with established relationships in the collector community, someone with a reputation for honest dealing and professional competence, someone who understands that this business is built on trust, not presumption. That's a very specific set of qualifications. I'm a very specific investor. Are you interested in discussing this further? I'm always interested in discussing business opportunities with successful people. Excellent. Why don't you come by the house this afternoon? We can talk about possibilities. Richard Blackwood's house was a Mediterranean-style mansion on Longboat Key, filled with art that most museums would kill for. He'd been collecting for 40 years, and his taste was both impeccable and expensive, the kind of collector who could make or break a gallery's reputation with a single endorsement. Quote, 3:30, Quidum. He said as we sat in his study, surrounded by paintings worth more than most people's houses. You've been treated badly by people who should have known better. It's been educational. I'm sure it has. But education without application is just entertainment. What do you plan to do with what you've learned? I looked around the room, taking in the carefully curated collection that represented decades of passionate acquisition. This was what the art business was really about, not the scheming and social climbing that had destroyed Grant Bishop, but the genuine love of beauty and the relationships built around that shared passion. I want to open a gallery that serves collectors like you the way you deserve to be served, with honesty, professionalism, and respect for the relationships that make this business possible. And how would you differentiate yourself from the existing market? By remembering that collectors are people, not assets to be leveraged, by representing artists based on the quality of their work, not their willingness to provide kickbacks or personal favors, by building a business on trust instead of presumption. Richard nodded slowly. That's a refreshingly straightforward approach. What would you need to make it happen? Capital, obviously, the right space, artists willing to trust a new gallery with their work, and collectors willing to give me the chance to earn their business? The capital can be arranged. I know several people who'd be interested in investing in the right opportunity. As for the space, there's a property downtown that might be perfect, the old Meridian building on Main Street. The owner's been looking for the right tenant. And the artists and collectors. Richard smiled. Owen, you've spent 15 years building relationships in this community. The fact that Grant Bishop tried to steal those relationships doesn't mean they've disappeared. They're still there, waiting for someone worthy of them. We spent the next 2 hours discussing details, startup costs, timeline, business structure, marketing strategy. Richard had connections with investors, property owners, and established collectors throughout Florida. He was offering not just financial backing, but entry into a network that could make a new gallery successful from day one. There's one condition, he said as our meeting wound down. What's that? I want you to succeed because you're good at this, not because you're angry at Grant Bishop. Revenge is a fine motivator for getting started, but it's a terrible foundation for building something lasting. What makes you think this is about revenge? Richard laughed. Owen, I've been in business for 50 years. I know the difference between opportunity and vengeance. The question is, do you? I thought about that as I drove home. Was this about revenge, or was it about opportunity? Did it matter, as long as the result was something worthwhile? Maya was waiting for me when I got back to the condo, curled up on my couch with a book and a glass of wine. She looked comfortable there, like she belonged in my space and my life. How was your meeting with Richard? She asked. Productive. He wants to back a new gallery. With you running it? That's the idea. Maya set down her book and studied my face. How do you feel about that? Excited, nervous, like I'm about to jump off a cliff and hope I can fly. And Julia and Grant? What about them? How do they fit into your new gallery plans? I sat down beside Maya and pulled her close. They don't. That's the point. Owen, I need to tell you something. Julia called me today after the newspaper story came out. And? She's leaving Sarasota. She and Grant are moving to Miami next week. He's going to try to start over down there, maybe find work with an existing gallery. I absorbed this information. Julia and Grant were fleeing Sarasota, abandoning the life they'd tried to build on the wreckage of my marriage. Grant's reputation was so damaged that he couldn't continue operating here, and Julia was following him into exile. Quote 360. Maya asked. Quote 361. Quote 362. I considered the question. How did I feel about Julia leaving? 6 months ago, the thought of her moving to another city would have devastated me. Now it just felt like the logical conclusion to a story that had started the day she decided to cheat on me with Grant Bishop. Quote 360, I said finally. Quote 364. Quote 365. Maya was quiet for a moment, then, quote 366. Quote 367. Quote 368. I thought about Grant Bishop, his reputation destroyed and his business failed, preparing to start over in a new city where no one knew his name. I thought about Julia, discovering that her upgrade had turned into a catastrophic downgrade, following her failing boyfriend into an uncertain future. I thought about myself, about to open a new gallery backed by serious investors and built on the relationships I'd spent 15 years developing. about to turn betrayal into opportunity, failure into success. I think it's both, I said finally. Justice for what they did to me, and revenge for thinking they could get away with it. Maya smiled and kissed my cheek. As long as you're clear about your motivations. Crystal clear? Good, because I have news too. What kind of news? I put in my notice at work today. If you're serious about this gallery, you're going to need someone to handle marketing and public relations. Someone who understands the local community and knows how to build relationships with collectors. I stared at Maya. You want to work with me? I want to build something with you, something that's ours, not theirs. Something that proves good people can win if they're smart about it. I kissed her then, tasting wine and possibility and the future we were about to create together. When we broke apart, Maya was smiling. So what do we do first? First, we sign a lease on the Meridian building. Then we start calling artists and collectors. Then we plan an opening that will make everyone forget Grant Bishop ever existed. And Julia? I looked out the window at the Sarasota skyline, thinking about my ex-wife packing up her life and preparing to follow her boyfriend into exile. Julia gets to live with the consequences of her choices, so just like everyone else. Maya settled against my shoulder, and we sat there in comfortable silence, planning our future while my past prepared to disappear into the rearview mirror. It was exactly where it belonged. 2 weeks later, I signed a lease on the Meridian building and began converting it into the Reed Gallery. Richard Blackwood's investor group provided the startup capital. Sarah Chen helped me recruit artists, and Maya handled marketing with the kind of enthusiasm that made everyone believe we were going to succeed. Julia and Grant left for Miami on a Tuesday morning. I didn't watch them go, but Maya did, and she reported that they looked like refugees fleeing a disaster zone, which in a way they were. The Reed Gallery opened 6 months later with an exhibition of contemporary Florida artists that drew collectors from across the state. Richard Blackwood bought 3 pieces on opening night, setting the tone for what became the most successful gallery launch in Sarasota's recent history. Julia sent a congratulations card from Miami, where she was working as an assistant designer for a firm that specialized in hotel lobbies. Grant had found work as a sales associate at an established gallery, earning a fraction of what he'd made as an owner. I threw the card away without reading it. Maya and I were married a year later in a small ceremony at the gallery, surrounded by art and friends and the life we'd built from the ashes of my previous one. Julia wasn't invited, obviously, but she sent another card, this one wishing us happiness and signed, "With love and regret." I threw that one away too. Some things are better left in the past, where they belong. The Reed Gallery became one of the most respected art spaces in Florida, known for discovering new talent and serving collectors with integrity and professionalism. Maya's marketing genius and my industry relationships proved to be an unbeatable combination. We were featured in Art News magazine 2 years after opening in an article about successful gallery partnerships. The writer described our operation as Simtsach, quote, 383, noting that we'd managed to create something significant in a market previously dominated by less scrupulous operators. I framed that article and hung it in my office, right next to the storm cloud painting that had started it all. Julia called me once, about 3 years after the divorce. She was back in Sarasota, working for a small design firm and living alone. Grant had left her for a younger woman, a pattern that probably should have been predictable. I made a mistake, she said. A terrible mistake. I threw away the best thing in my life for someone who wasn't worth it. Yes, I said. You did. Is there any chance? Could we try again? Could you forgive me? I looked across the gallery at Maya, who was discussing a sculpture with a collector, her face animated with genuine passion for the art and the business we'd built together. Quote 390. I told Julia, quote 391 would oh we quote 392 quote 393 quote 394 or quote 395. I hung up before she could respond. Maya found me in my office an hour later, staring out the window at the Sarasota street where my new life had taken root and flourished. So quote 396, she asked. So quote 337 or on quote 398 and quote 399. Maya sat on the edge of my desk and took my hand. Brewer quote 400 twit on. I considered the question. Did I regret refusing to forgive the woman who'd betrayed our marriage and tried to steal my life? Did I regret building something better with someone who actually deserved my trust? No, I said. I don't regret it at all. Good, Maya said, because we have a business to run and a life to live, and both of them are too good to waste on people who had their chance and threw it away. She was right. We had built something remarkable together. A business, a marriage, a life that was everything my previous existence had pretended to be but never actually was. We had turned betrayal into opportunity, failure into success, revenge into something that looked remarkably like justice. Julia and Grant had gotten exactly what they deserved, each other, until even that fell apart. And I had gotten exactly what I deserved, something infinitely better than what I'd lost. The Reed Gallery thrived. Maya and I thrived. Our life together was built on honesty, trust, and the shared understanding that some mistakes are too costly to forgive. Julia learned that lesson the hard way. Grant learned it too, and I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while your enemies live with the consequences of their choices. Beige paint, it turned out, covered a multitude of sins, but it also provided the perfect foundation for something beautiful.